Welcome to the Seller Roundtable e-commerce coaching and business strategies with Andy Arnott and Amy Wees.
Okay, we're good.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Seller Roundtable, episode 17 with Amy Wees and
Andy Arnott.
And today we are talking about big box retail with our very special guest, Timothy Bush. Hello, Tim, and welcome.
Thanks so much, Amy and Andy, A squared, right? Yeah, thanks a lot. It's great to be here. I'm excited to talk all about it.
Awesome. Well, Tim, I guess we should start with you our podcast is all about selling on Amazon, and kind of retail is really kind of a big mystery to a lot of our listeners. So we would love to hear about you and your backstory and your experience, and just tell us the whole life story, the shortened version.
I was going to say, wow. Okay. So back in as far as how far back do you want me to go? I mean, I grew up in California, so a little town called Fallbrook, which is in North San Diego County. When I moved there, it was just this little tiny dinky town, and we moved out in the middle of nowhere, and so I had no friends near me. That's where I started. I started riding motocross, because the only way to get from here to there out there was to ride some sort of a motorized vehicle. And so that's where I picked up motocross, and motocross kind of got me through, I don't know, junior high and high school. And I had a lot of fun doing that. And we had avocado groves, basically. And so we had about 10 acres. Half of those were organic and half of those were not. And back then, organic was this. If you asked my dad, he would say organic is just a money drain. It's like owning a boat. The stuff that you have to do to the grove to keep it organic and indifferent from the other groves and get it certified and all that was a money drain. So I spent a lot of my youth working in the grove and picking avocados. And I don't think that the grove ever made $1, even up until now. But it was a good write-off. So, and we always had really good avocados. I mean, Southern California, I make a really mean guacamole, and especially if you're eating organic avocados, man, I was
going to say, Tim, do you still eat guacamole today?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I do. I love it. And like I said, I make a really good guacamole. And occasionally my dad will send us a care package from California with some organic avocados, which is always nice.
And so you said send us a care package. Where are you living now, and what's going on?
Oh, yeah. So I'm in Orlando, Florida. I had a client that wanted to purchase a large chunk of my time about 7 years ago, and they were here in Central Florida, and so they moved us out here, which we wanted to get to the East Coast anyway. Most of my business was on the East Coast, and it's hard when you're trying to go for a 30-minute meeting with a retailer, and it takes 3 days to accomplish a 30-minute meeting because it's just so far to go. So being on the East Coast made things, I think, easier. And so, so we're in Central Florida and really enjoying it. Except right now, it's starting to turn very hot. I mean, really hot, super hot in the 90s every single day. So already.
It is roasting here in Texas as well. So tell us about your past jobs and, college, schooling, and what you're doing now.
Well, it's funny because I just released a podcast this morning with a brand expert. His name is David Lemley. And we were talking about like, what did you want to be when you grew up? And he said he wanted to be Pablo Picasso. And I was thinking, so that's one I've never heard before. But I was talking about my first job, which was, it was my first introduction to retail too, because I got a job at a little auto parts store in Fallbrook called Cars Auto Parts. And interestingly, the guy that owned it, his last name really was Carr, C-A-R-R. And my job there was to keep the back room shelves straight and nice, and then to deliver parts to like all the gas stations in town that called and needed a part. And I just remember thinking, I was never, all the adults at the time, because I think I was maybe just 16, and all the adults just hung out at the front counter chit-chatting. That's all. It seemed to me that's all they did, is just chit-chat. And I was like, I'm the only one doing any work around here. And so, yes, that was my first foray. And after that, to be able to pay for the gas in my car, I worked at Chevron as a gas station attendant. Back then, we actually had full service pumps and everything. You could go drive in to get your gas pumped. So I did that, and that was in high school. So in high school, I was a swimmer and a water polo player. And when I went to college, I became a crew. I had had enough of being in the water and decided to be on the water for a while. So I rode on the crew team all the way through college, which was super fun. Really enjoyed that. And when I got out of college, I went to work in retail. If your goal is not to be in retail, don't start there, because they get their hooks in you and they pay you a lot of money. And at the time, it seems like a lot of money. And at the time, you're making probably 3 times more than anybody else you know. And then the next thing you know, 10 years goes by, and then you're not making. Then all those people are now partners in a law firm or something, and now they're making more than you. But yeah, so I started working for a company called Captron World of Nintendo. And at the time, this was in the late 80s, and Nintendo was still like it. I mean, they were massive, and they had the monopoly on all the games. And this company I was working for had decided this cool concept. They made these little kiosks, and they plopped them in the middle of the mall. And it was the only place at the time that you could actually go and test out a Nintendo game at the store before you bought it. And it was this brand new concept. And so I worked there a while. And then after college, I ended up being their operations manager, and I flew around the country opening up a bunch of these stores all over the country.
Very cool.
Fast forwarding, so I went from there to Toys R Us, and then I went from Toys R Us to Office Depot and Barnes & Noble and Bed Bath & Beyond. And I worked for most of the major big box retail chains, which is probably Toys R Us is where I got 90% of everything that I know about running merchandising a big box retail store. And so most of what I teach or talk about, or when I talk to buyers about merchandising, it still comes from back in the early 90s, when a lot of these stores were really, you had to be a merchant. You had to figure things out. I mean, there wasn't these CAD planograms anymore. They just would give you blocks of space. So, put these action figures here. But as a store director, you had to figure that all out. How we're going to get them in there. So there was a lot of learning that went involved. And pretty much everything I know about merchandising, I learned at Toys R Us, and probably everything I learned about what not to do. Also, I learned at Toys R Us, I think.
So how did you feel when Toys R Us went out of business?
Well, I did a podcast on it. And it's, if you haven't listened to that one, and anybody that's in retail or does anything with retail, you should listen to it, because I put a lot of anecdote. There was stuff that happened at Toys R Us that would just blow your mind. People who shop in retail they're just crazy. They're crazy. There's one story I told, and this is a true story. This lady comes to me and she's holding her daughter's hand, and she leans over, she whispers to me, and she says, "See that ride along over there?" And I don't know if you remember, back then there was these big cars big motorized cars. They're called big wheels. Not like the big wheels. They weren't called big wheels. I can't think of it right now, but they were big, and you could sit inside them. They were motorized.
Yeah, and that was a big deal to go to Toys R Us and get
in one of those. Yeah, drive it around like you're a big shot. Yeah. So she's like, "Yeah, see that Barbie car over there? Yeah, my daughter, she pooped in that." And I'm looking at her like, "And did you?" She's like, "You might want to check that out and clean that out." I'm thinking, what? That's your daughter. She just was. She pooped in there. Do you want me to go get it? And that's, we could go. I could do a whole 2 hours on stuff that happened at Toys R Us. But yeah, so when they went under, actually, it started way before that, because when Charles Lazarus, who was the founder of Toys R Us, stepped down, the company never really recovered from that. And when the person who has the passion, who doesn't come to work because he's a billionaire or a millionaire, he comes to work every day because he wants to, and he still drives the same old shabby pickup truck, and there's something about that transfers to a company, and they still have this soul to them. And then once that person steps down, everybody else is just trying to fill that money void. Like, hey, I just want to make all that money that he was making it. And so it struggled. And then Target figured out something that would ruin and kill Toys R Us forever. And Toys R Us still never figured out how to combat that. Was Target decided that they would kill their whole toy department and then rebuild it with just the hot toys. And they lived in this hot toy 90-day whatever world where if you wanted the very hottest thing, that's where you went, to Target. And the way Toys R Us made their money was people would go there for the hot toys, but then they would get diapers and formula, and they would get all this stuff that they weren't there to get. But once all the hot, if Jimmy needed a present, people would just go to Target. And once those people stopped coming to Toys R Us, it just was this massive, it was just this avalanche, and they never recovered from that.
And that's an important thing in retail, is to be able to drive traffic to your stores with whatever tactics you can use to keep you, at the forefront.
Target did some cool, we used to have, back when their videos were a thing, instead of streaming, we used to have Target Tuesday, because Target would release all the brand new CDs, movie CDs DVDs on Tuesday. And my wife and I, we would be there every Tuesday to see what was new. At one point, I think we had something like 500 DVDs. And then, streaming came out, but they capitalized and killed that one part of it.
Yep.
Anyway, you could keep me going on that.
Timothy, it makes me think of two things. What you just said. The first thing is the poop story reminds me of People of Walmart. Have you ever been to that website? If not, you absolutely need to check that out.
I'm sure that I can pretty much relate. Yeah,
it's epic. It's literally like it's like real pictures of people that have been spotted in Walmart. It is epic. If you have not, you can literally waste hours on that website. It's fantastic. The second thing is soul of the company, visionary, things like that. First thing that pops into my mind when I think of that is Apple. Just look at the decline of Apple since Steve Jobs died. It's still a very powerful company, but the innovation's gone. You look at an Android phone compared to an iPhone now, and the Android stuff blows it away. So, I definitely see, where you're coming from there is, once the soul of the company, the founder, the visionary, the guy who's passionate, or girl who's passionate leaves, it's a whole new company.
I used to call Steve Jobs the Wyatt Earp of technology, because, he was in Apple, they kicked him out, and then the whole thing went down the tubes. And so they're like, Steve, you have to come back. It reminds me of Dodge City, when they fired Wyatt Earp out of Dodge City and he left, and then Dodge City just went to hell, and they had to have him come back and clean the city up again. But it's hard. Steve Jobs, unfortunately, that's, he not only, he was just the brains behind so many things. You can't replace that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in. Join us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for live Q&A and bonus content after the recording at SellerRoundtable.com. Sponsored by the ultimate software tool for Amazon sales and growth, SellerSEO.com and AmazingAtHome.com.